because I had an idea of how I was going to start this debate, and I've been thinking about that and changing my mind back and forth. Because I planned on coming out here to be the voice of people that feel oppressed, effectively, by gun control legislation. And I might put myself in that category. I've been here since 2011. So I was here when we passed the gun control legislation that was passed in the wake of the Sandy Hook tragedy. And I remember that night very vividly. I was in the House of Representatives then, and I felt like much of the world was against me because it was such an emotional time. And obviously, everyone was tremendously saddened, broken, in fact, because of that terrible tragedy. And even thinking about it conjures up many, many very, very upsetting thoughts about what happened at Newtown on that fateful day. But I also knew at the time that I couldn't simply just succumb to emotion. I had to use reason to decide what policy would make the most sense going forward to make our state as safe as it possibly could be. And there were very few voices that wanted to join me in reason over emotion. So I spoke on the House floor late, probably around midnight, for about an hour, maybe about an hour and a half. And I gave it my best shot. And I looked back on that just recently to see what I could have said that might have made more of an impact on people. And the people I want to make an impact on are the people that are in favor of this type of policy. I can stand up here very easily and speak to the people that are in favor of the Second Amendment and opposed to this bill, because I'm one of them. And I know where they come from, and I know how they feel. They feel attacked. They feel like the state government has taken off a hand, and now they're coming back for an arm, and then maybe a leg. And it just never seems to end. And they're frustrated because no one seems to understand exactly their point of view. It just seems like an automatic. If there is a tragedy somewhere in the country and a gun is involved, somehow taking away this person's guns or my guns is going to make a difference. And I know in my heart that is not true. It's not true at all. In fact, for me and many of the people I'm speaking of, we would be the very first people to run in between that armed, terrible person doing something dangerous and the people he was attacking. So imagine how we might feel when our rights are on the chopping block year after year, legislative session after legislative session. But it's hard to understand where people that I disagree with on this issue come from. And sometimes, like a lot of people, I get angry, I get frustrated, and I assume that they just don't understand, that they don't know anything. And I don't want to be that way. I want to say these people have good hearts, they have good souls, they believe this for a reason. But my hope tonight is that throughout this debate, I explain enough about this bill and how I think it doesn't go to the source of the problem. Senator Kissel did a fine job of pointing out that what we have is a criminal problem in Connecticut. It's not a gun problem. And I believe that to be true. And we can look at history. The gun control that may pass tonight, the gun control bills that passed in 2019 that were pretty substantial, I was here for that also. The gun control that passed after Sandy Hook, the gun control that passed in 1994, the original assault weapons ban, all those things have allegedly been to cut down on gun violence. And yet, it seems like we have more than ever. And you can point around the country to places where they have the most gun laws. And you also find out that those are the places where you have some of the most significant gun violence and homicides. I don't really know how to transition here, Madam President, because I really do need to make the case against this bill. But I want to at least let people understand that I am not here trying to attack back. What I'm trying to do is make the case for the people that I believe are counting on for me to do so. And I'm not against anyone. And I will assure everyone that we are all against gun violence. There's nobody in here that wants to see anyone harmed. No one. And the idea that somehow if you don't support a gun control bill, that somehow you might be an uncaring person or that you're in favor of gun violence or recklessness is just absurd. There is another argument that is worth hearing and listening to. And I'm going to do my best to make that argument tonight. I'm going to say some controversial things tonight. I'm sure I will. And they might even get some people upset. But let me just explain that I'm going to try and be as factual and forthright as possible in the way that I do this. The first thing I want to start by saying is that I don't believe this body has the lawful authority to pass this bill. I think it's a direct and flagrant violation of our oaths of office, both the U.S. Constitution and the state Constitution as well. More simply, if you plan on voting yes, I'm suggesting that you really should consider whether you have the right or the power to do so. And I know people will vote yes anyway. But my hope is that someday soon, the Supreme Court of the United States takes a hard look at the gun control laws that have been passed across this country. In this state, in New York State, and elsewhere, there have been really significant infringements on the rights of the citizens. I would remind everyone that I'm talking about everyone's rights, not just the rights of gun owners. I'm talking about everyone's rights. Because whether you believe it or not, the Second Amendment applies to you, even if you don't want to have a gun. And it affects our society, and I think in a positive way. It's a shame that gun control seems to be the go-to answer for people on the left whenever there is some sort of tragedy. I was going to quote Governor Lamont. He was going to be senator at one time. I think he was attempting to do that. So maybe that was a flashback. Indeed. Governor Lamont has been very outspoken on the subject of gun control. And I wanted to just quote a couple of his statements. When this bill passed the House, he said, "We need to do everything we can to keep our communities safe and prevent those who intend on doing harm from accessing these deadly weapons." Well, we can take apart that sentence, but let me just offer another of his comments before I do that. He also was very outspoken after the tragedy in Nashville, saying he was sickened and heartbroken by another mass shooting at a school by a person with assault weapons. And so were we all. And when the gun violence prevention law passed earlier this year in March, he said firearm companies manufacturing guns, especially those that were invented with nothing but the sole purpose of killing as many people as possible within the shortest amount of time. And maybe even more hyperbolic, he said policy proposals that represent a fair, common sense balance that respects the rights of Americans to own guns. I would have preferred, after any tragedy, that he chose the correct thing to do, the correct answer for someone who was elected to represent the entire state of Connecticut and the people that live here. The reaction should be, we need to find out the facts before I comment on this. We need to understand what really happened, and we need to find out the best policy decision. But unfortunately, many politicians immediately react by spouting off and using the terminology that Senator Kissel mentioned about ghost guns and assault weapons. The public is tired of this. It demonstrates a lack of knowledge about the policy implications, and more importantly, it poisons any chance we have at having a reasonable conversation and a debate that results in good policy discussions. It cheapens that debate, and it cheapens the value of our representation. The bill before us is a laundry list of new crimes. But in every case, they are victimless crimes. Banning open carry, ghost guns, stopping so-called bulk purchases, new licensing requirements, raising the age to purchase long guns, storage requirements. All of these things are not violence. None of those things hurt anyone. And this is where what we've come to, is that we are taking victimless crimes or victimless actions and turning them into crimes. None of these acts harm anyone, but turning them into crimes certainly does. These laws can turn honest, decent, law-abiding citizens into criminals overnight. And I'm afraid that the bill that's before us will have that end result. And I believe there's an acknowledgement in the bill, because there are many, many provisions where the first offense is a much reduced sentence, because I think there's a recognition that there are people that will be caught up in this bill that should not be. This notion of creating crimes out of victimless acts is symbolic of almost all the gun control that has been passed over the last decade, including what we did in 2019 and during Sandy Hook, or after Sandy Hook, rather. Changing all of these requirements that are in this bill will do nothing to curb crime or prevent someone who is mentally ill or fully committed to harming other people from doing so. We need criminal control, not gun control. As Senator Kissel alluded to, a gun is an inanimate object. It's just a tool, like a hammer. And intent is what the problem is. People harm each other with all different types of devices: bombs, cars, bats, fists. Surprisingly, long guns, which are singled out in this bill in numerous ways, are one of the lowest tools used in crime, if you want to look at it that way. And we can pass all the laws that we want to in this state, but nothing stops someone who is committed. They can travel to another state. As was mentioned, we are a small state, and most of these things are not illegal elsewhere. I said something in the committee discussion on this bill that was a little controversial, and people took some issue with it. And I said that none of the gun control laws passed in this state over the last decade have made one single iota of difference in fighting crime or stopping the next tragedy from occurring. It's just pure luck, nothing more. And that's true, because none of that would have stopped what happened during the Sandy Hook tragedy, and nothing that's in this bill would make any difference either. If someone was committed to committing one of those acts, they would have. And any criminal that is going to commit any crime with a firearm is not going to be deterred by what is in this bill. Not in the least. I don't want to say that there's nothing good in this bill, because there is. There are some very good provisions tacked onto the end of this bill, and actually some things that benefit the rights of law-abiding gun owners. And I am appreciative that those things were considered and included. But I think we should be better than this. We should be working on real solutions and not scoring political points by putting the gun control issue at the forefront and making hay out of ghost guns and assault weapons. Back in my original debate in 2014, I closed by explaining that there are things we should and could do. There are 4 things. One of them was actually done last year, and I give credit to Governor Ned Lamont for doing it. After Sandy Hook, there was a good provision that was included in the bill that we passed that said that we would fund a program to prevent the trafficking of illegal firearms in the state. And we funded that to the tune of $1 million. What a great idea. If we look at statistics, we find out that almost every murder committed with a gun is in a city with an illegal firearm, obtained probably on the street somehow. So if we could actually attack that problem and get the illegal guns out of the hands of criminals and gang members and stop them from shooting one another, we would make a very large dent in the amount of crime that we have in this state. And I'm thrilled that they actually put that in that bill back then. But you know that they funded it for only 1 year. And since that time, I came into this building year after year proposing a bill to begin funding that program again. I offered it as an amendment numerous times, both in committee and on the floor of the House and Senate, and it was rejected over and over again in favor of more gun control. How frustrating. So I was surprised, I guess is not even a big enough word to use, when I found out last year that Governor Lamont was considering reviving the statewide firearm trafficking task force and funding it. And I was very pleased to see that happen, because I think that is a cornerstone of how we actually do address this problem in our state. The second thing we need to do is to start reversing the terrible, terrible policies on crime that have passed in recent years, that undermine law enforcement and let violent criminals get away with their crimes by failing to prosecute them, allowing repeat offenders to run rampant and harm civilians. Back then, I was focused really on the risk reduction credit program, because that was something that had passed around that time. But today, there are far more laws that need to go. Our society is becoming more and more lawless over time. And that is a direct result of the policies passed by this legislature, coming from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, not to mention the rhetoric that goes along with it. Risk reduction credits, consent searches, police chases, the police accountability bill. None of that has made us any safer at all. In fact, I believe if there is a source to crime increasing in our state, it's a direct result of the way we treat law enforcement and the way we treat the prosecution of criminals in our state. The third thing I said we needed to address, which has never really been addressed since, is mental illness. Over the last several decades, in an effort to remove stigma, we have really tried to work on addressing mental illness and recognizing that the vast majority of people that suffer are nonviolent. And that's positive, and that's something we need to do. But it seems to me that when there is a tragedy in this country, we often discover that the person that is responsible has been suffering some sort of mental illness. But more problematic, that was known to others. They were, generally speaking, known to authorities, and nothing happened. Nothing was done to stop that. And finally, number 4 on my list of suggestions, if we want to actually truly prevent more tragedies, is school security. I have advocated year after year in this building to fund school resource officers. There's only one way to stop a bad guy with a gun, and that is a good guy with a gun. That's the reason why we have police in our society. That's who we count on. That's who we call When we are in danger, we call somebody with a gun to protect us. Guns are not going away. There are just too many of them in the world. I know there are some people who would gladly confiscate every firearm, but even if you tried, you would never accomplish that. And what we would be left with is only more criminals in possession of guns and innocent, law-abiding citizens unable to defend themselves from those criminals. The legislature, I feel, has lost its way, and maybe a long time ago, in the sense that we have forgotten our history. The right of individual citizens to own firearms comes from a knowledge of the past. It was included in our founding documents by people far more brilliant than I. But the thing about the Second Amendment is what it does. It's not just about, oh, you can have a gun. That's not what it is. It's a recognition that American citizens are free and sovereign. They are effectively kings and queens in their own right. And they have the right to do the things that kings and queens do, including owning property, deciding what they want to do when they get up in the morning, and defending themselves and their property. That's what makes us special as a country. And when we diminish that right, that ability to state that I am a free citizen and I have the right to defend myself, we diminish what it is to be an American, in my eyes. I started by saying that I don't believe that the people in this body have the right to pass the bill that is before us, and I do that because of my knowledge of our state and U.S. constitutions. The Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights says the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. They tried to write our founding documents in as plain language as possible so that they would not be misinterpreted. I see that didn't work out as well as we would have liked. Our own state constitution affirms something that has been contested year after year in court after court by people on the left that says that it's not really about individual rights. It's about a militia or it's about some group rights. There's no such thing as group rights. There are only individual rights. And our state constitution reads, every citizen has a right to bear arms in defense of himself and the state. Nothing could be more clear than that. They recognized that each citizen of Connecticut had a right to defend himself or herself. These documents that I'm referring to are there to restrict the government. I spend a lot of time speaking in this circle, and I'm always referring back to the American system of government because that's why I'm here. That's the thing that drives me. It's what I love. That's why I come here, to remind people what it is. That we live in a society that recognizes the power and freedom of the people that we represent. We are small, small people here in this circle. We have very little power. We have many, many bosses. Each one of us has 100,000 bosses. And we work for them. And we are supposed to carry out their will. It's wrong of us to pass legislation that interferes with even one of those people. And we've gotten very used to suggesting that if you have a simple majority, we can deny the rights of the minority. Our founding documents were written explicitly to prevent that, to recognize that even if you're just one person out of 100, your rights matter too. So the people that founded our great country and the people that wrote our state constitution, they recognize that. So they put protections in place to say the government should not have the power to deny the rights of citizens. That's where we get the right to free speech, to assemble, to petition the government, to exercise our religion of our choice, and our right to state our ability to defend ourselves. I'm going to go through the bill, but what I want to do is remind everyone, and I'm going to try and ask in a lot of places, but if I don't, ask yourself if each one of these sections of the bill meets certain tests. The first question is, will it work? Is it actually going to do anything? Are we going to have less crime? Or are we going to have less tragedies if this section of the bill becomes the law? And then ask ourselves, is the potential benefit of passing this law worth the trade-off of denying the freedom to some of the people we represent? We should also ask ourselves if when we pass these laws there is disparate impact on different parts of our culture and our society. Maybe people of color or people who live in certain communities. I believe that some of these laws will have a disparate impact, and we should avoid that at all costs. Before I go through the bill, I want to just say one thing that I have said many times before, and if they ever remember something I said down the road, it's going to be this, which is that I will never vote to take away the rights of the people I represent, even if they ask me to. So I've had people that have asked me to support this bill, and I have to tell them, I say, look, I'm not taking your right away. I just won't do it. If you don't want to be interested in the Second Amendment, if you do not want to be interested in owning a firearm or defending yourself or using your full set of freedoms, that's up to you. But I am not going to take that right away from you. You'll have to do it yourself. I know that there are a lot of folks that want to speak. So I think what I'm going to do here is I am going to sit down, give other people a chance to get up and say a few words, but I will come back and go through the bill shortly. Thank you, Madam President.